Welcome to Next Gen Mentoring Forum. The Next Gen Mentoring Forum series is to empower, educate, illuminate individuals who are interested in the financial planning industry. At each forum, an expert will discuss a topic in the field of financial planning with the purpose of inspiring critical thoughts and discussion. In today's session, I will interview Bill Van Law III, CFP, on the topic of how should advisors leverage the continuum of business models. Let's go to the next page, please. Ivana, let's go to the next page. My name is Dr. Chia-Li Chien. I am the Director of Financial Planning Program at California Lutheran University. I maintain an active financial planning practice specializing in succession program management at Value Growth Institute. I've authored 3 award-winning books, including the most recent peer-reviewed research book published by Pelgrim Macmillan entitled Enhancing Retirement Success Rates in the United States. Let's go to the next page. One page above. Let's go back to the previous page, please. The Next Gen Mentoring Forum is sponsored by California Lutheran University School of Management Financial Planning Program. We offer MBA in financial planning that helps financial advisors pursue a leadership position to grow their financial planning practice by deploying advanced financial planning, effective communication, client communication, financial counseling, streamlined practice management, as well as leveraging fintech. Right, let's go to the main show of today. Let's go to the next page. Bill Van Law is today we have Bill Van Law in our session. He is an experienced financial professional with a track record of success. Perhaps most importantly, Bill is known for his commitment and compassion as a leader in the business and the community. As a frequent speaker and industry thought leader, Bill has been quoted in numerous publications, including Wealth Management, Think Advisor, Investment News and Research, and on the Wall Street. He has spoken and led sessions at many of the top events in the wealth industry, including Barron's Top Independent Advisor Summit. I'm going to pronounce this incorrectly, but excuse me with that. Tiburon CEO Summit and Deal and Deal Makers Summit and Capital Council. He also leads sessions for wealth firms of all sizes, including strategic planning workshops, as well as keynote address for corporate events. Now, before I turn the floor over, that I wanted to mention that Bill actually has 15 years at Raymond James as an executive role, as well as 18 years in the Merrill Lynch. But before I jump to today's topic, Bill, would you be able to share with us, how did you get into the industry?
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Chien. So great to be with you all today. And congratulations on each of you choosing the financial planning career. You know, provides such a wonderful opportunity to have impact on your clients, and also to enjoy just an interesting career as you interact with so many different people. You know, I ended up in this career as a result of a combination of factors when I was in college. My dad had changed careers and had gone into the financial planning career, and then a roommate of mine had pursued this business. And sort of interesting, he asked me to go on the interview with this financial planning firm, which I did. He ended up not pursuing it. I ended up getting hired and sort of fell into it, but just fell in love with it. When I graduated, I had worked at IBM during my final year of school in a co-op program. Thought I might stay in the technology arena, but as I explored both technology opportunities and opportunities in our industry, ended up having an opportunity with Merrill Lynch right out of college. And so decided to pursue that and have never looked back. It's been such a rewarding and an enjoyable career.
It's interesting that it's never a straight line, isn't it? A lot of us, I know at least in my own experience, I was a career changer, obviously much later than your experience. I came into the industry in the corporate financial system side, so there's some technology that I could relate to in your experience. But once you enter the industry, obviously you fell in love with it and did really, really well. Would you share with us, how did you progress from the entry level all the way up to the executives? What does it take for you to make that success?
Oh, well, first of all, luck, always plays a role, but it's about hard work, and it's about being open to the possibilities. When I first started in the business, I started as a junior member of the team of a senior financial advisor. Really enjoyed that, did that for several years. My primary role then was prospecting and helping bring in new client relationships to that senior advisor. And after a few years, decided to go out on my own. I have to say that was a scary period of time. I remember reading an article in one of the research publications at the time that talked about how challenging it must be for the 30-year-old, give or take, advisor to earn the trust and of the typical person with higher assets, of course, being the retiree. Well, at the time I was 25, and so like, oh my gosh, I wish I looked 30. But in any case, went out on my own as an advisor at 25 and just thoroughly enjoyed it. Was fortunate enough to have some great mentors who provided some advice and guidance, one of which was get your CFP. So started my CFP just a couple years later and earned the CFP designation. It's hard to believe it's been so many years ago, but earned the CFP designation in 1990. And so just thoroughly enjoyed that. My main focus was estate planning. And so built the business largely educating people about the importance of estate planning. So in fact, did estate planning seminars every month for a decade with a local attorney. Thoroughly enjoyed that, but then was introduced into the opportunity of mentoring new advisors and then ultimately running the training program for new advisors. Was really intrigued by that. And so decided to explore a career in leadership. And so had an opportunity to move to Gainesville, Florida, where I managed my first office. And I think this also, I'll backtrack for a moment, because when you go into leadership at Merrill Lynch, they have an assessment process. And so it's a rather arduous process, thorough process. It's a day and a half where they're monitoring virtually everything. It's interviews, simulation, role playing. And then they meet after you're done and vote. And in order for you to make it into that next level of leadership, you have to be in the top 40% in their mind of leaders within the firm with development over a 3-year period of time. Sounds sort of difficult, but as I looked at it in retrospect, I'm like, what a great process, because who would want to give up a successful practice to move across the country and fail as a manager? But it's also a great lesson in terms of overcoming obstacles, because there's 3 potential options: pass, fail, or deferred. I was deferred. And so after I was deferred, I was thinking, okay, great, at least I don't have to move. But as it happened, the development opportunity it gave me was to run my first branch. So I moved to Gainesville to run that office. But it was also instructive in the importance of life has obstacles. And if you're not prepared to overcome them, you're not going to achieve the success you otherwise would. Interestingly, in the history of Merrill, the people that have been deferred actually enjoyed on average a higher level of success, which I thought fascinating, because those are the ones that didn't pass right off the gate. Further study, the conclusion was that we all have things to work on. If you were deferred, you knew the only way that you could go on is to work on these things so that you could ultimately pass and go on to a career in leadership. And apparently over time, that sort of approach and philosophy is one that they adopted and used over the course of their career, continuing to learn and grow, continuing to overcome obstacles, I think that's one of the reasons that they enjoyed success. But from a leadership standpoint, continued on, was district sales manager, and then ran a couple of complexes. When things changed at Merrill in terms of senior leadership, decided it wasn't where I wanted to spend the balance of my career, and then shifted over to Raymond James. But in terms of that decision, Dr. Chien, and your question about that, you know, a big part of what grabbed me there is I thoroughly enjoyed the time as a financial advisor. However, I was just intrigued by the challenge of really being able to influence people's lives from a leadership standpoint, and just the variety of issues that you have to deal with in leadership. And so that's what sparked the, frankly, really challenging decision to give away my business and pursue the career in leadership. But I have to tell you, it's been such a wonderful experience. You know, some of the different things I've been able to do over the course of my career, certainly wouldn't trade it, but they're different. And I think that's a choice that people have to make as they're pursuing and looking at what they want to do, is try to find the best fit for what they are interested in, for their skill set, so they go down the path that they feel will be most rewarding, and be open to change, much like you referenced where you changed in your career mid-career. Be open to change if you decide that there's opportunities that are a better fit.
Wow, there's a lot of things that let me just unpack it, because I think that there are a lot of things that you mentioned. One key thing that you talk about is really just to be open-minded. And that's one key thing. Then the other thing is to be open-minded, not only for the opportunity, but willing to learn. And learning usually comes from challenges. But at the very beginning, you mentioned that as you started out in your career, you're noticing that you are very good at prospecting. And then I think that's one thing people really need to pay attention of, is that sometimes niche is not something you define, is rather they find you. So in your case, you're naturally good at prospecting, and you have a mentor, and you've gone through the proper training of getting CFP. Those are all very important things. Then you work, specialize in estate planning. Not only that, you have center of influence relationship with the attorneys that you probably doing some either joint work with clients or joint marketing. Those are really fabulous skill sets that many of the advisors ought to consider to do. Additionally, you mentioned about that as you cross over into leadership position in the corporate world, even though you have been deferred in terms of the assessment. Now, assessment is only a way to assess someone in terms of a certain criteria, but I think the message there is never get discouraged about any kind of defer or fail status, because that tells us that we have room to grow. And in your situation, that you consider that is obstacle, and we all going to run into obstacle one way or the other in life, and you took that as a learning opportunity. You adapt and learn as much as you could, and ultimately open to change. And I think that's one key thing that anyone who is in any business, it doesn't have to be in financial planning, it could be change. Change is always constant, and be open-minded for that. That's really phenomenal in terms of helping people see that there's not a straight line from one point A to point B. So that's thank you so much for sharing with us with your experience and wisdom to help everyone be successful in this industry. Ivana, if we don't mind to go, so my questions to you is, as we're looking into the business continuum as a topic today, and we know that in this industry there are just three major types of business models, and there's really not a right type of business model for every practice. And I too work with so many advisor firms. It really has so many different factors. Not one business model is best or the other. Could you talk about why there's not really necessarily the right business model for not one size fits all? Share with us, what do you mean by there's no right business model for everyone?
Sure, would be happy to. As Dr. Chien mentioned, I spent the last 15 years at Raymond James, and in that experience, I was in four of their business models, from independent employee, which is a business that I launched for them in 2004, to the traditional employee business where I ran that business for the most part that was not in Florida, Texas, and Michigan. In fact, I joked at the time that one of the side benefits of that is I got more frequent flyer miles than the other three combined because they were located in those respective markets. Joke, but also true. And then ran business development for our independent broker dealer. And then when I retired, I was president of the RIA custodial business. And so, having been the only senior executive that was in all of those businesses, I was asked frequently by advisors as they were looking at the firm, which business model is right. And, so I've thought a lot about this question over the years. And the conclusion that I've come to is that the right answer really depends upon the circumstances. It's also important to recognize that it'll change over time. And the right answer for you early in your career is often different than the right answer for you later in your career. And so just being thoughtful to that, also as Dr. Chien was referencing earlier, being thoughtful to circumstances and flexible regarding the right opportunity for you. So it might be that the right opportunity earlier in your career relates more to the team that you might join, for example, than the firm that team happens to be at, because having the mentors in that team, could make that decision a better one for you at that point in your career. And so we'll dig more into this later on in today's session, but each of those different business models has different attributes that, as a result of that, have pros and cons. And those are things that should be considered as you're considering what the right model is for you.
And thank you for taking us through your experience in Raymond James. And I truly believe that remaining flexible and adaptable, and oftentimes I tell my clients, you really just have to have your antenna up all the time, looking for that opportunity. Sometimes, well, for the younger folks, they may not know what antenna is, but when you see an opportunity, oftentimes we are so consumed with our own business, sometimes we miss that. So I think that I always encourage people to really stop for a moment and look for those opportunities. Sometimes they're right in front of you that you potentially don't see it. You mentioned mentors, and this is probably not the first time you mention it. I had an opportunity to spoke with someone who is also very successful in the business. She had mentioned to me that she actually counts how many mentors she has, as well as how many mentees that she continued to pass on to the industry. What do you say to someone who is either in the beginning of the industry or till the tail end of the industry? I myself also have mentors. My rule has always been mentors for me. And then I also mentor 3 active industry professional. What would you say that to folks who either is looking for mentors or looking to mentor someone? Are there any specific recommendation that you would provide?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And, awesome that you're not only mentoring, but also being mentored and mentoring, because I do think giving back over time is extremely important as well. But, mentors can be, on one hand, both, opportunistic, and on the other hand, something that you actively seek out. I'm reminded of reading the book on Tesla and Elon Musk. And for any of you that know the story or read that book, that Elon and I think it was his brother actively sought out some of the most successful leaders across industry, across the country, cold called them, and then drove across the country to meet face to face. Here we are in COVID, which we were discussing actually before this. I'm sitting in a hotel room, so I was joking earlier, the flag's behind me. No, I'm not a member of Congress, but I'm in a meeting room at a hotel room in Palm Springs. But actively seeking mentors, I think, is something that is important. So really being thoughtful about folks that you might build a relationship with, and just simply asking their advice. And so, these could be people that are in your specific industry, which is important, but they could also just be broad leaders within your community, people who you respect, who can give you guidance as you progress over the course of your career. I also referenced opportunistically participating. So you just may have opportunities that come just as a result of interactions with organizations like the Financial Planning Association, for example, where if you're going to any of the local meetings, you just meet some of the more seasoned financial planners who can provide advice or guidance. But they also can be, I mentioned doing the estate planning seminars. Part of the reason for doing this was really trying to be thoughtful about what the needs were out there. So at that point in time, estate planning, very significant need. My experience was that most clients really hadn't thought about it. And as I learned more about it through the course of my financial planning work, realized the taxes that would be paid needlessly if people didn't have a proper estate planning. So it was an opportunity to really help the client. And then separately, I also referenced how young I was starting in the business. The attorney I selected was one who had a fantastic relationship and reputation in the community. Top graduate from when I was in Florida, from University of Florida, and then did law school at Duke. He was top 10 in both. So, extremely bright. Part of my goal there was associate with who I felt was the very best estate planning attorney in the community. And so by association, with a combination of having a CFP, being connected with the best estate planning attorney, in our community, just raised my profile, as a younger financial advisor. And so he then turned out to be a mentor of mine, and still to this day, a good friend, here 30 years later. And so I would say opportunistically being just aware of this, as you mentioned, Dr. Chien, keeping your antenna up to what those opportunities are, and then separately, proactively seeking out relationships that you feel could potentially have impact.
And I think that one of the things that the two things that being after actively looking or just being affiliated with association like FPA. One of the interesting things, two things that you mentioned out of the mentorship. One is that not only you look for them, but you also take the opportunity to do what I call the co-branding. And I did that myself as well. I actively calling one of my mentors. Interesting thing about people is that when you ask, and if the chemistry is there, oftentimes people are very delighted to take on a challenge like this. The worst that they could say is, no, I don't, move on to someone else, but it doesn't mean that they will never be available to you. So I think that having the courage to call someone that you respect in the industry, you just may be surprised. So I did that before. In the co-branding portion of it, in your situation, you have a very reputable estate attorney working with you that you kind of just co-brand out of him, but or being successful. So I think that those are all the techniques oftentimes people don't necessarily think about. They just thought, I'm just going to go to meet a mentor, but then do not think beyond that relationship. There's so many things, beautiful things. So thank you so much for giving us those insights. Ivana, let's go to the next question, please. One of the things that I oftentimes see company, not necessarily in financial that the ability, and this is the key words that we've been talking about again and again, being flexible and being adaptable. And here is about technology, right? Technology innovation plays a key role, not necessarily in financial planning practice. I could argue that probably any industry out there, how fast you can adapt and how fast you can innovate plays a key role of the future growth of the company. So share with us, what do you think about how does the technology and innovation actually help or not help the financial planning practice?
Yeah, really great question. And as I was reflecting on this, I was just thinking about, how technology impacts our lives, in so many ways, from the cell phone, which we think about how dependent we are, but how flexible this allows us to be. So with Dr. Chien and I both operating from different hotels on this live webinar is just a wonderful example of that. But I was just thinking about so many other aspects of our lives. Who would have thought, 20 years ago that automobiles would be impacted by a global chip shortage? You think, maybe it would have been some other part, but not a computer chip that would impact that. And I was thinking about something as simple as bicycle, with cycling as one of my passions. I just bought a new bike a couple of months ago. It's all electronic shifting. There's no wires, it's pretty remarkable. But when we think about our industry and the role that technology has played, it really has profound impact. It has impact on the relationship with a client, the ability to connect with a client in the way the client wants you to connect with them, in the time and the place. It also has impacted this shift in business models as we look at this shift to more independent business models, which has been an increasingly important and prolific trend in our industry. It's been hugely impacted by technology. It used to be that in order to have technology and access to resources, you needed to be at one of the big firms. That isn't the case anymore. In fact, some might say that instead, the smaller firms, because of their ability to pivot and adopt new technology more quickly, that those firms actually enjoy a competitive advantage versus the bigger firms. When I was at Raymond James, I sat on the technology prioritization committee. And so that group looked at technology as we were making changes and enhancements to our platform for advisors. Well, one of the challenges we had, even being a bigger firm, was that you still have limited resources. And if you're spending money on the CRM today, for example, you're not spending it this year on the financial planning package. And so you tend to sort of leapfrog where you adopt the latest version of a particular tool or resource. And then as you're doing that, maybe another firm is adopting the latest version of a different piece of technology. As an independent firm, you're able to pivot more quickly. And so some might even argue today that there's more freedom and flexibility in terms of technology innovation in those arenas. And when we look at fintech and the impact that fintech has had, both in terms of the opportunities for that sector, but also how they've empowered independent financial advisors and independent firms, it's really been fascinating to watch. But I certainly expect these trends to continue. I think the really great news for those that are paying attention and are aware and adopting this technology is it really enhances your ability to have impact on your clients, connect with clients, and deliver financial solutions for your clients.
And as you use the car and bike as an analogy, I'm going to use the books as an ago when Amazon started the book business. Now everybody knows that we get everything pretty much. I even get groceries from Amazon. And I remember back in the days when Amazon first came about, the publishers, a lot of businesses were very scary because they thought that will be the end of publishing business. The interesting thing is that, well, yeah, a lot of the books have moved into electronic, but there's still a huge volume of the printed books being sold. And that's probably because what you mentioned about some of these smaller players, they can pivot so quickly and probably have more freedom to do so compared to the bigger companies out there. And I think ultimately from what you mentioned about relationship, connecting with the clients, using the proper fintech in the practice, ultimately we are adapting to the consumer's behavior, right? The consumer will change their behavior or how they want to acquire certain type of services. I remember last year or the year before that, I did a talk regarding about So what's the future of the advising business? With knowing that robo-advisor is being in the practice and being adopted into working with clients. So how do we do that? I think ultimately the key words that you mentioned there is really trying to have a different way of connecting with clients, as well as watching what the consumer's behaviors actually unfold, because the technology enables us to do so many different things. Without the technology, I don't think any business could survive in the pandemic, but we all did it. All of us have gone through the challenging year of meeting clients through virtually, but yet somewhat creative. And I don't know if this is the trend that you're seeing. I believe last year in 2020, those firms who adapt very quickly, seeing a tremendous amount of growth in their revenue. That's the one that I'm seeing, and I hope that you're seeing the same thing there. All right, so let's go to the next page, please. So what are the most 5 common business drivers that actually help drive the business model?
So as you look at what the drivers are of why an advisor selects a particular business model, well, there are many different issues that come to play. I found that it really falls into 5 major categories. I also think, and we'll talk more about this later in today's session, I also think it's helpful to think about these different categories as a continuum, where you look at on the far left of the continuum, the traditional employee model, on the far right of that continuum, the RIA model, and progressively taking on more risk and more potential financial gain as you move through that continuum. But the 5 different drivers, which you can see here on the screen, are first risk and responsibility. And we can talk, Dr. Chien, you can tell me what you want us to do now or later. We can expand on each of these. But risk and responsibility and the impact that has on the business. Freedom and control. And well, you see financial implications listed as number 3. And when you think about financial implications and that impact on an advisor's decision to either select a business model or often it's moving from one business model to another, while financial implications certainly, have impact, what we found over time is that freedom and control is really what ultimately it impacts satisfaction. And it is what drives the satisfaction, particularly in the independent business models. 4 is growth and growth opportunities. And as with the others, this is different depending upon which model that you might be in. So if you look, for example, on the growth area, and if you're in an employee type of model, you have opportunities to earn referrals from the firm, for example, from investment banking, or if an advisor leaves and they distribute those relationships to other people, so you can inherit accounts if somebody leaves or retires. If you look at more independent models, independent contractor or independent RIA, the opportunity to market yourself and your firm is often more flexible. And so the ability to utilize social media, the ability to be out there doing advertising, maybe radio shows, other things that you just might not be able to do if you're an employee, because they're frankly worried more about advertising their firm than advertising your individual practice. And then also one of the things that has certainly occurred and even accelerated in recent years is inorganic growth. So either recruiting advisors to your firm or acquiring independent financial advisor practices for advisors who are retiring. So that opportunity is greater in those more independent business models than it is in the employee business models. And then the last element is succession. And succession, there's more flexibility again as you move across that continuum. So when you look at succession as an employee, that's largely driven by the firm. So these firms will have what they often refer to as sunset type of programs that allow an advisor to bring in, a junior advisor to ultimately take over the business. And it's a structured process where the firm actually dictates the financial aspects of how that program works. As you are exiting, all of the income you receive from the sale of your business is taxed as ordinary income. So it's just, regular W-2 income over time. When you look at the more independent businesses, you're actually selling the goodwill of that business. And so because you're selling a capital asset, that it's driven by the market in terms of the buyer and seller and the value, that they agree upon. But then secondly, because you're selling an asset, it's typically going to be taxed as long-term capital gains versus ordinary income.
There is obviously a lot that's packed into what you just say. Why don't we go ahead and go to the next page, because I'm afraid to ask any questions that might potentially prolong the discussion. We probably should have a day to talk about this. So let's talk about, in terms of Continuum business model. Walk us through, what does it actually mean?
Yeah, so when you think about those different drivers that I referenced earlier, and this continuum that I had referenced, right at the beginning of my remarks on the last question, I think visually it's helpful to think about these risk factors from the perspective of this continuum. And so if you look, for example, at the level of risk. So level of risk typically would fall into two categories: the category of compliance and regulatory risk and business risk. And so if you look at the compliance and regulatory risk, and this, as you look at these two elements, is important to recognize that while they do progress from left to right over the course of that continuum, they don't progress in the same way. And so risk is a great example of that, because on the regulatory and compliance standpoint, traditional employee, independent employee, and independent contractor, because they're all affiliated with a broker-dealer, that risk level is the same in all three of those, doesn't change. When you look, however, at independent RIA on the far right-hand side, that compliance and regulatory risk is the responsibility of the advisor or the RIA. If you look at hybrid, it really is partially the firm and partially the advisor. So hybrid, as you know, is where you have a combination of a brokerage relationship and then also an RIA. And so with that relationship, you're responsible for the regulatory and compliance risk for your RIA, and the firm is responsible for the regulatory and compliance risk of all of the brokerage business, with the one caveat that the firm is also responsible for supervising outside business activities. And one of those business activities in this case, of course, is the RIA. So it's hybrid from that perspective in terms of the supervision there and risk there. If you look at business risk, as you progressively move from traditional employee to independent employee, for example, you've taken on more business risk, because in that particular model, you are responsible for your staffing expenses and also your rent. And so as business goes up and down, that provides some leverage. And so this business risk continues to progress higher as you move on out. So independent contractor, more risk still, hybrid a bit more, and independent RIA more still. And so two different examples, one that moves linearly across the continuum, and the one that kind of stair steps, if you will, the same, jumps up and then jumps up again for that last factor. When you look at freedom and control, somewhat similar to what we described in terms of regulatory and compliance, the financial aspect tends to move also sort of from a step standpoint, but a little bit more linear. So it's almost a balance between the stair step and the linear. And by that, I mean, when you look at the financial progress, it tends to take some bigger steps as you go along the way. But one of the things I think it's also important when you think about the financial implications, as a business owner, you're taking business risk, but the financial benefit that you gain from greater levels of independence partially is the fact that you're taking on new roles. So when you're an employee, your role is just one, serving as financial advisor. As a business owner, you have the responsibility for running the business and managing the business. And so you're getting paid not just as an advisor, but you're getting paid to run the business, and you're getting paid for the risk of owning the business. So it's important to recognize that there is some time and responsibility that goes hand in hand with that additional compensation. The biggest benefit, however, from a financial perspective is leverage. As your business grows, often what occurs is your expenses aren't growing as rapidly as your revenue. And so that's what often attracts more seasoned financial advisors to these more independent business models, particularly those that are actively growing their business, because they look on out and they say, gosh, if my business doubles over the next 5 years, but if I manage expenses and those expenses go up by, let's say, half the rate of revenues, then there's real leverage in terms of margins. And then the other financial implication is valuation. And I found this really remarkable as I've watched how this has transpired in the current environment, when there have been more and more firms out there acquiring smaller advisory practices, that these valuations have increased markedly over the last several years, providing opportunities for financial advisors, frankly, that they didn't think they would have. And then I'll comment briefly on the last two. Growth is different depending upon the options. I referenced this briefly in my response to the last question, but there certainly are some opportunities to grow that are different in the independent arenas. And then succession, we also talked about in that last question as well. It's been interesting to watch, as I said, in terms of acquisition, what the opportunities are out there. But I'll also tie, my last remark here, succession to mentoring, because I would encourage any of you out there that are currently in practice and have your own advisory firms, really be thoughtful about the next generation and the next generation team, and mentoring, the members of your team so that they have opportunities long-term similar to those that you have. Because I just think it's a really critical issue for our industry. One of the things that, and this is why programs like what Dr. Chien is running, at Catherine Lutheran University are so important, because we really don't have enough people coming into the industry. And so having more people providing mentoring, if you're in there, of next generation advisors is really important for us collectively to be able to meet the needs of individual clients and help them through all these important financial decisions over the course of their lives.
And I think that it is, I'm totally on the same page with you. And here I've seen many of our students come through our program specifically trying to figure out how that risk and rewards formula works. Ultimately, everyone, for those who is willing to take the risk, they're obviously looking for that upside. That upside of the rewards oftentimes is better in terms of what you mentioned about leveraging the independent side. And what this comes down to is not necessarily that who should do what. I think that one could argue that, you may or may not have the talent, but I would argue that it really comes down to one person's or few, that your capacity and capability, right? You have to have both capability and capacity. And oftentimes the biggest issue that I've heard in terms of the shortage talents in the industry is that many of the firms that you and I work with has a capacity issue. They have more clients than they could even handle. And so going into that independent route or independent RIA route really still also forcing the owners to look at not only taking the advantage of that scalability platform that you build, but at the same time that enable to create that valuation that you're looking for when you exit. If you don't have that talent pools as a continuum, you would potentially face some challenge going down the road, because there are just a lot of shortage this year. We are only in May, the beginning of the May, just as a program, we received 7 to 8 different senior advisors roles at opening, and it's really, really hard to fill. It's not that there's not enough people to apply. Finding the right fit, when I say right fit, is not necessarily the skill, also the fit in the culture. It is and so if the business is not addressing that talent pools, part of this business model continuums, that the talent pools, the fresh blood coming through your business, put a really big pressure for the growth model, if you will. So thank you so much for giving us that clear picture of it. Ivana, question, please. And so I guess ultimately, for those people who are willing to take the risk, looking for that upside growth and upside valuation of the company, what do you think that advisors should do in able to get to that point?
Yeah, great question. You know, as you're looking at your practice and really being thoughtful about the value of your practice, proactively thinking about it is really key. And so I think there's a number of different issues that are drivers of future value. And I was reminded of this with the work that I'm doing presently, with consulting, and we invest in independent wealth firms. And I was thinking about a firm that we looked at here recently versus a firm that we looked at a couple of years ago. And the assets of the two firms were about the same, about 600 million or so in assets. But one of the firms sold for a valuation of 25 million. And the other firm actually hasn't sold yet, but it looks like it'll sell for a valuation of around 10 million. Both of the valuations, frankly, quite high and probably much higher than what many of us would have thought a firm of that size might sell for, if we look back, even 4 or 5 years ago. But what are the differences that drive the valuation of one relative to the valuation of the other? And I would say, that it starts with a plan. The old Yogi Berra quote, if you don't know where you're going, you might just end up somewhere else, I think is also true. And being thoughtful, and as we've heard, how important it is to work on our business, not just in our business, is really key. And so being thoughtful about where your business is headed is really where it has to start. Second item is, you can't improve what you don't measure. And so we've all heard about the importance of, these KPIs, key performance initiatives, and measuring those is really important. But being thoughtful about what they are, I think is important because, these have become so broadly used. And, in my experience, in some cases, the KPIs end up being such a long list that it's just another tool as opposed to something that really is focusing attention. And that's what you really want, is focus attention on those key things that are really important. So if I go back to my early days as an advisor, for example, I used to track asset flows from very early in my career. And so I would look at all new either larger deposits or new relationships, as well as any larger withdrawals, and track that every month with a monthly goal and an annual goal. And that process of tracking is really, really important. The next element is a team. As I phrase it, life and your business are better with a great team. It's all about the people around you, and just recognizing that, there are, fortunately, if we look at administrative roles, for example, there are people who are administratively talented and would do a way better job than I would ever do in that sort of role. They also enjoy that sort of role in a different way than, frankly, I would. And so recognizing that as you're building your firm, surrounding yourself with great people that are as passionate about their roles as you are about yours, is really going to make your ability to attain higher levels of success, that much easier. And then the last element is that, if you create a business that really is an awesome business to own, it's going to be a business that is going to end up with a higher valuation when coming time to sell. That business that I referenced that sold for 25 million, I actually heard on Sunday. I've stayed in touch with the CEO of that firm, even though we ended up not buying it. And he sent me a text regarding, I guess he was sparked by Warren Buffett's remarks this weekend with their annual meeting. And I had recommended to him the book Snowball on Buffett, when he and I were chatting a couple of years ago. And so in any case, really being thoughtful about valuations, being thoughtful about how you run the firm. And as I think about the way he ran the firm, he was really thinking about making the firm bigger than him and empowering his team and organic growth and all the things that made his life so much better as he was running the firm. And the wonderful part about it is not only did he, as a result of that, enjoy a much more interesting life and enjoy the career more than he otherwise would have, it paid the added dividend that when it came time to sell, the valuation of the firm was at a premium because of all those things that he did that just made it the right type of business to run during his time as a financial advisor.
Yeah, so those are phenomenal examples, 25 million versus 10 million, even though the asset under management is the same amount. You're right. Having the right type of leaders in the firm, doing the right thing at the right time, as well as willing to use the team approach to empower the organic growth. And without a plan, it's really, really hard to accomplish for that. Let's go to the next page in terms of, we've gone through I have a few pages of notes in here. We've gone through a lot of things here, but if you could give us one advice, out of everything that we talked about, if you could give one advice for those people who are entering or already in the business, thinking about moving to a different type of business model, what would that be?
Yeah, so it's interesting when we talked about this at the beginning, I was thinking about the career advice. So I'll do both. I'll do both, advice in terms of business models and then just some broader thoughts. And in terms of the business models, I think the important thing to remember here is life cycle, and then it's all about you and these pros and cons that we discussed over the course of today's program, I think are so important, and really being thoughtful about what the circumstances you're in today, what some of if you think about the trade-offs of these various drivers, just think about each one of those individually and be thoughtful about that so that you can come to the right conclusion for you. And just recognizing that it's the right conclusion for you. It's not that there's a right business model, it's the right business model for you. And then the broader comment or advice is, actually I'm going to mention three things. The first is the impact of relationships. One of the things I think is so interesting about our careers, it creates opportunities to just have experiences that we might not otherwise have. And so one of the things Dr. Chien referenced I have spoken at is the Tiburon CEO Summits. As an offshoot of those summits, they do this adventure trip once a year. That's what brings me actually to Palm Springs. So this adventure trip is actually a little crazy. It's roughly, this one for this year, it's about 50 people doing this kind of crazy long one-day hike. So in Palm Springs yesterday, this was a makeup, Cactus to Clouds, which is 22 miles long, 10,000 feet. Took us 14 hours, so it was quite a day. I'm a little tired today, but the people that we do it with is just such an interesting group. And so these are all people in the industry, one of whom happened to be Skip Schweiss, who, as many of you know, is the current board president of the Financial Planning Association. And so, having interesting people like that you interact with just enhances your life. So I'd just be thoughtful about relationships and things that you decide to do. We talked earlier about mentors. Mentors can be hugely impactful. And the last thing I'd leave with you is one of the things in my experience that separates the most successful from others is lifelong learning. And so when you think about the CFP, in fact, Skip and I were talking about this yesterday in the trail. You do these things and often it comes back to business, but I was asking them about some of their plans and we talked about continuing education. And I referenced to him that, I felt that while I had learned so much getting my CFP, that I learned even more after that with being thoughtful about the continuing ed and doing continuing ed that would really be impactful for the type of business that I wanted to do with my clients. So that lifelong learning process, I think, is one of those key attributes that separate the most successful advisors from others. So I've enjoyed being with you today. I hope you've found a nugget or two that is helpful, but I just want to congratulate you on choosing what I think is a fantastic career and wish you much success in the future.
Well, thank you so much, Bill, for such an informative session. I walk at least from my perspective, that I walk away with more than few nuggets. And I think that these are things that both of us have experienced, and both of us encourage people who are in the industry or coming through the industry, that ultimately that relationship bit that you mentioned, that experience. I used to belong to a group called the Women Presidents Organization. We had the same thing, that we go out with the adventure trip. And those are the time that you oftentimes foster those relationships, either with someone who is in the industry or not in the industries. That's where the ideas are exchanged. That's where you build your lifelong relationship. That's where you actually have the sparks to continue that learning, because things always change, and that learning can only come from many different sources. And so thank you so much for an informative session. Ivana, if we can go to the next page, please. And I wanted to especially thank Bill, as well as California Lutheran University School of Management Financial Planning Program for sponsoring today's Next Gen Mentoring Forum. If we could go to the next page, please. California Lutheran University School of Management, we offer MBA in financial planning that helps financial advisors pursue a leadership position or grow their financial planning practice by deploying advanced financial planning, effective communication, financial counseling, streamlined practice management, as well as leveraging fintech. Please sign up for our info session for more information. Our next Gen Mentoring Forum session is on May 18th at 1 p.m. Please join me to interview Dr. Chia-Li, who is a CFA and CFP. She is going to talk to us about how to attract women as clients into your practice. And thank you all for attending today. We will look forward to seeing you in our next Gen Mentoring Forum. Thank you, Bill.
Thank you.